Hello, thrill seekers. Welcome to Real Crime Stories, the channel that plunges you into the heart of spine-chilling mysteries, true crime cases, and unsolved enigmas that defy explanation. Today, we're unraveling a gripping collection of stories that will haunt your thoughts. If you're hooked on suspense and can't get enough of these eerie tales, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to never miss a video. Now, brace yourself, let's dive into the first bone-chilling story. I'm not a serial killer, I swear. I have insomnia, and oftentimes find myself up until the early morning hours. To pass the time, and sometimes even try to lull myself to sleep, I watch YouTube. I like to watch videos about different unsolved mysteries, strange phenomena, and serial killers. A few nights ago at about 3 in the morning, I found myself drawn into a new channel. The name of the channel was Tales of the Other World. The first few videos were of the typical fare, a couple of strange disappearances, and one very chilling confession on a message board. The next video came up and was entitled The Most Prolific Serial Killer in American History. In truth, I had seen several videos in the past with this title. Most of them portray the likes of Bundy, Dahmer, or even the Zodiac as the most prolific serial killers, and I subconsciously prepared myself for another one of these individuals to pop up on my screen. Much to my surprise and dismay, the photo that popped up wasn't any of those men, nor was it any serial killer you've ever heard of. Instead, the face on my screen staring directly at me was none other than my own. To be honest, I wasn't really listening to the narrator due to my surprise and had to start the video over to actually hear what was being said. The audio portion is as follows, with some personal information redacted for my own privacy. With a body count of over 153 confirmed victims, this man stalked the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast. Active for more than the 2nd of December AIDS, he committed his first murder at the age of 12, when he pushed his babysitter from the second-floor balcony as she was having a cigarette. At the time, the authorities chalked it up to an accident, and it wasn't until he was in custody at the age of 32 that he confessed to the murder. Tomas _______ was able to escape detection by changing his MO and signature constantly. He studied other famous serial killers and would learn from their mistakes as well as their successes. An indiscriminate killer, Tomas _______ crossed social, economic, racial, and gender boundaries. He never committed a murder in the same area as his previous one. The most odd thing about this man is the fact that if he had not in fact turned himself in, he would probably never have been caught. Authorities and psychologists are still perplexed as to why such a cold-blooded murderer with no empathy would give up in the middle of a murder spree. The narrator continued by describing my childhood, including when and where I was born, as well as the names of all my immediate family. Every bit of information the narrator said was dead on accurate. The hairs on my neck started to stand on end, and I became sick to my stomach. I felt violated and terrified at the same time. I slammed my laptop shut and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. By the time I got back to my room, I had calmed down slightly. I knew it had to be some kind of joke one of my friends was playing on me. It was no secret that I had a slight fascination with serial killers and the like, and I was definitely known to watch a lot of YouTube. So, it was entirely possible someone I knew had created the channel and the video as a way of messing with me. I opened my computer up and went to the channel page. There were only 5 videos uploaded, and all had been posted over a year ago. I clicked on the About section in an attempt to gain more information. The channel had also been created a year ago, and there was no information in the description section aside from one sentence. To learn more, please email me at admin@_____. By then, I was sure it was one of my friends playing a prank. I clicked the email link and began typing. I expressed how I was not pleased with my personal information being put on display on the internet, and to a lesser extent was not happy about being portrayed as a serial killer. I mean, what if a girl I liked had seen the video, or worse, one of my little cousins? As much as I appreciated a good joke, I definitely felt that this video had crossed a line. I ended my email by saying that they needed to take the video down and then call me so I could personally chew them out. I closed my laptop and finally found the peace of sleep after tossing and turning for a while. I woke up the next morning and proceeded with my daily routine. I went to work and then came home. I made myself dinner and sat down to binge watch some Netflix. It had been a rather pleasant day, and I was in the mood for some comedy. About halfway through the second stand-up comedy special, a notification popped up in the top left corner of my screen, indication that I had received an email marked as important. I paused the show and opened up my inbox. The subject line of the new email was, "Not a joking matter." I opened it up, and this is what it said. "To whom it may concern, I am pleased that you have watched my video, but I must insist that I find it in poor taste that you are claiming to be Tomas _________________. This man is, in my opinion, a monster of the highest caliber, and anyone wanting to emulate even something as small as his name is in need of professional help. At best, I consider you a very poor jokes man, and at worst you might be delusional. Though it was a nice touch to claim I am the one pranking you with some kind of false video. I definitely think you should seek a psychiatrist to help you." After I finished reading the email, I was perturbed to say the least. If this was one of my friends messing with me, they should know that my email was a serious one, and I would not be happy when I found out who it was. I did find it odd that they used an actual name at the end though, and decided to do some research to find out if it was in fact a real person. After a few minutes, I was able to find this person on social media. I snooped his page and was unable to find any links to a Tales of the Otherworld website or really anything having to do with serial killers or the like. I figured whichever one of my friends was pulling this prank had just made up a name that happened to be that of an actual individual. I opened the email back up and hit reply. My response is as follows. "Dear Jackass, enough is enough. I'm not sure if this is Paul or Chris or even maybe Danielle, but whoever it is, the joke has ran its course. You should know that I am being 100% serious, and that if you don't take down that video, that when I find you, it will not be good for you. I am up for a promotion at Walmart, and I do not want this to come up when you Google my name. Seriously, take it down. P.S. The fake name you used is actually a real guy. I found him on several social media sites. I figured that the email would be enough to convince whoever was behind the joke to take the video down, and figured that shortly I would be receiving a call from one of my friends laughing and apologizing at the same time. I continued my Netflix binge for a few more hours when I got another email marked important. This email read, "Okay man, I'm done playing games. This joke has gone too far and I am seriously concerned about you. I fear you may be delusional. There is no such place as a Walmart, and I have never heard of Google. Also, of course I'm on social media, but all of my personal accounts are private, so I have no idea how you found me. Though in an effort to have this charade over with, I am willing to set up a video chat and you can prove to me who you are. Let me know if you agree to this and I'll set up a time. Joseph." That email bothered me slightly. I wasn't sure what the actually endgame was now. I guess maybe it was actually a few of my friends pranking me together, and when the video chat connected, they would be on the screen laughing at me. I replied that I was fine with video chat and waited to receive a response letting me know when. After a few moments, I received a reply and an invitation to a video chat right then. I accepted, and a new window popped up. As the video chat connected on the screen, I saw not any of my friends, and instead, it was the same man I had tracked down on social media, only his hair and facial hair were different. As soon as he looked at me, the color drained away from his, and he said one sentence before disconnecting. "It is you." I still have not been able to connect again with him, and he has not answered any more of my emails. Needless to say, I am definitely disturbed by this entire exchange, and I have no idea where to go from here. All I know is that I am not a serial killer. I've done some searching on the internet and discussed some of the particulars with a few people on message boards, and the general consensus is that somehow I was able to access an alternate reality. Apparently, the individual who created the video I watched and who I was able to contact through email and video chat was also from this alternate world. That is at least the prevailing theory. Now, as much as I like to watch videos about the paranormal, I consider myself a skeptic and would have not given these theories much credence at all. That is, until the dream I had last night. It was a very odd dream in which I had no real control over my action or movements. It was like reliving a memory, except it was of something that I have never done, nor would I ever do. Quite frankly, it makes me sick to my stomach just to think about it. After it was finished, I woke up drenched in sweat with my heart pounding. In my dream, I was back at my childhood home. The sights, sounds, and smells were so vivid. It was almost as if I could reach out and feel the rough texture of the cream-colored wallpaper in the hallway. I climbed the stairs and could feel the shag carpet, which covered the steps, between my toes. As I glided up to the door which led to the balcony, I could see my babysitter, Tiffany. Tiffany was a junior at the local college during the time she sat for me. She was taller than average and had long flowing auburn hair. She was extremely skinny, and in fact I believe she was on the track team and was a very proficient runner, which would help to explain her lean physique. I'll be honest and admit to having a bit of a crush on her, and in my prepubescent mind, she was as beautiful as a movie star. Looking back, I think she was aware of my slight infatuation because every time she saw me, she would remark on how handsome I was getting and how one day I would be as good-looking as John Travolta, which, during that time, was a big compliment. It would never fail that when she told me such things, my cheeks would become flush, and I would be unable to thank her without my stutter becoming incredibly pronounced. In my dream, though, Tiffany does not notice me as I slowly open the door to the balcony and slowly tiptoe towards her. She is facing the railing which overlooked our backyard and is enjoying a cigarette. I know these days cigarettes are looked at as uncouth, but back then smoking was still seen as a glamorous and very sexy thing to do. She shuffled slightly as she exhaled a cloud of smoke. I can still feel the cool evening air on my face as I crept up to her. I could see my hands reach out behind her. It was in that moment that I knew what I was going to do. Terror and dread filled the entirety of my being. I willed every molecule of my body to stop, to just turn around and do anything but this. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop myself. My hands made contact with her and she started to turn as I applied force to said touch. The push knocked her off balance and she fell off the balcony. She had spun halfway around as she tumbled over the wood railing, her eyes meeting mine in a horrifying moment. I could see the look of fear and betrayal as she dropped from my view and hit the ground with a sickening, bone-crunching thud. I looked over the edge of the railing, and I could see her twisted and broken form on the ground below. A small pool of blood was already forming behind her head. The most disturbing thing, though, was that her eyes were still open, staring up at me with lifeless accusation. I awoke right after that part of the dream and immediately ran to my bathroom to vomit. The dream was so real and so terrifying that I never want to sleep again. After cleaning myself up, I immediately tried to contact Joseph again. I sent him several emails begging and pleading him to respond. I have never in my life had an experience as terrifying as that. This morning I finally got a response email from Joseph, and it is as follows. I'm not sure what to think about all of this. What you have written to me sounds like the ravings of a madman, and if I had not seen your face with my own two eyes, I would chalk all of this up to lunacy. After the video chat, I did some internet sleuthing of my own to try to figure out if there was a way for you to manipulate the video in the chat. As far as I can tell, there is no way to do that without me also being in on the edit. A few of your previous emails do provide clues that your alternate dimension theory may in fact be correct. Though, honestly, I'm still not sure this isn't some kind of elaborate joke, but for the time being I am willing to entertain this, if for nothing more than to have an interesting story for a future video. I propose we start simple and focus on the first two things from your initial emails. First and foremost, what is Walmart and what is Google? Also, if you can provide any information to back up these answers, such as links to sites or even Wikipedia articles on them, it would go a long way in proving you to not be a madman. As for your dream, what you told me was almost an exact description of how you supposed doppelganger from my world committed his first murder, but as it is a rather easily accessible bit of information, it does not necessarily prove your theory. Though, I do admit it is extremely intriguing. Looking forward to hearing back from you, Joseph. __________________________________________________________________________________________________________ Upon reading the email, I was relieved as well as terrified. I realized there was still a small part of me which had been hoping that this whole thing was just a sick joke which had gone too far. It was clear now that that was not the case. I took a few moments to gather myself mentally before sending an email back. In my reply, I explained to him about Walmart and Google and even attached a link to the homepage for each company and their Wikipedia pages. I also noted that he had wrote the word Wikipedia, which was strange, but honestly was one of the least strange things in this entire situation. I am eagerly awaiting a response from him, so I can get to the bottom of this. All I know for sure is I am not a serial killer. I hope. The past few days have been insane for me, in more ways than one. Joseph finally got back in touch with me, but unfortunately the links in the email I sent did not work for him. Which makes sense if he is in an alternate reality. So, ultimately I had to copy and paste from the sites, and actually film myself walking through work. That seemed to do the trick, and upon receipt of the follow-up email, Joseph admitted that I was indeed in another universe. Having him actually confirm it filled my heart with terror. I was honestly just hoping that I had gone insane, and truthfully, a padded room would be so much more preferable, compared to the sheer horror of my past few days. Of course, after the initial concession from Joseph came a flurry of questions, some of which I answered. Others, though, had me stumped. I began to realize that as similar as our universes were, they were vastly different in many ways. The truly chilling part was that whereas here we have a plethora of serial killers, mass murderer, and generally awful shit play out on a daily basis, in his world there is much less, which in turn means that when something disturbing happens, it is very big news. Hence how my doppelganger is the most infamous man in the world over there. After a few hours of 20 million questions, I reluctantly decided to call it a night. I showered and laid in my bed wide awake before slumber finally had me in its grasp. I had yet another creepy and terrifying dream. It was another pseudo-memory, only this time I wasn't 12. It was the summer of my junior year, and I had decided to drive cross-country, filming different ghost towns. It was an art project for school, but more importantly, it was an excuse to get as far away from my parents' impending divorce as possible. In this dream, I was about 40 miles outside of Lincoln, Nebraska. It was late at night, and the only thing I could find between the static of the radio was an oldies station. Leadbelly was belting out, asking, "Where did his girl sleep last night?" as my headlights came across a hitchhiker standing at the edge of the long, straight road. It was here that the dream differed from what happened in my reality. In my reality, I drove past the man standing with his thumb out, knowing how dangerous a stranger on a lonesome dark road could be, but in the dream, I pull over and invite him into the car. The man throws a bag into the back seat and then hops up front. He looks over, holds out his hand and introduces himself. "Thanks for stopping, man. Name's Leroy." I smile, shake his hand, and give him my name and offer to take him to Sioux City, which was my next stop. Leadbelly finished his soulful singing, and the dulcet sound of Cream playing Sunshine of Your Love came on next. Leroy turned up the volume while yelling, "Man, I love Clapton. He is a god. Want to smoke some grass?" he asks, holding out a rather large joint. I grab the joint from him and take a big, long inhale. The acrid smoke fills my lungs, slightly burning. This is an odd and unknown sensation to me, as I have never partook in any recreational drugs in my life. I exhale a huge cloud of smoke and pass the joint back to Leroy. We continue down the road, taking turns smoking until the joint is so small it burns my fingers. Instinctively, I drop it onto my seat and Leroy scrambles to pick it back up. "Sorry, man, I don't have any roach clips," he said as he snuffed out what little was left. "Thanks again for picking me up, man. Most folks are too wary about hitchhikers these days. What with all the serial killers and whatnot in the news." I just nod in agreement when suddenly I hear a loud pop and the steering wheel jerks to the right. My tire had had a blowout, so I pulled over to the side of the road to change it. Both Leroy and I stepped out of the vehicle. I popped the trunk and handed him my jack and tire iron. He started to jack the car up as I fumbled with the spare. I plopped the old spare tire onto the ground with a thunk as Leroy finally got the car at an appropriate height. "Hey man, hand me the tire iron, will ya?" he said over his shoulder. I could feel this cold, yet pleasant feeling start at the base of my skull as I walked over and picked up the tire iron off of the ground. Leroy was sitting down on the ground facing the tire. His right arm was extended with his hand open, waiting to be handed the tool. Just like the previous dream, I knew what I was doing, but I could not stop myself. I swung backwards over my head with the tire iron and brought it down in one swift motion. The cold metal of the tool connected with Leroy's head and a sickening crunch echoed in my head as metal collided with flesh and bone. Blood splattered onto my face and ran down it in warm streams as I swung again and again. Then, after several more hits, the crunch sound had deflated into more of a squishy thud, like a baseball bat striking a bowl of mashed potatoes. Blood and brain matter oozed from the crushed remains of Leroy's head. I pushed his body out of the way and finished changing my tire. After I was done, I rolled the corpse into a ditch and drove away. That cold feeling at the base of my skull had transformed into a warm hug that enveloped my entire body. Yet, my mind was racing with thoughts. A part of me was appalled at my actions, the part that was just a passenger on this crazy ride. To be honest though, a part of me thoroughly enjoyed it, and what scares me the most is I'm not sure whether that part was dream me or the real me. I awoke drenched in sweat yet again. I walked to the bathroom in the dark. I turned on the light and froze in terror for a moment as I could see the blood splattered across my face in the mirror. I closed my eyes tight, and when I reopened them, my face was clean. My imagination was definitely running wild. I decided I had had enough sleep for one night and was going to just stay up. I'm not sure what the hell is going on, and I don't know how much worse it is going to get. All I know is I'm not a serial killer, I think. Story. I am a police detective, and I cover every mirror in my house at night. I became a detective a little over 1 year ago after spending 5 years on the beat. Any case I've worked on has always been clear-cut, no questions left unanswered, concrete evidence, confessions. But there was one case, is still one case, that leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Questions of which, I suspect, may not have an answer grounded in scientific rationale. As disclaimer before I begin, I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in ghosts or anything that can be termed the paranormal. Having said that, here's what happened. I didn't choose this case, but rather it was thrust upon me with the death of a colleague who was in charge of its investigation. He was a senior detective, 28 years experience. On the morning after the first night of the investigation, he was found dead in his home. His body was huddled into the back of the walk-in closet of his bedroom. The coroner cited sudden cardiac arrest as the cause of death. The bedroom door and the door to the closet were both shut at the time. And the photographs, I'll have more to say about them later. I was given a case file on a family of 3 who were living in a small flat in the Isle of Wight, UK. The family were Korean immigrants. There was a father, mother, and an infant girl. The case involved the sudden death of the 38-year-old mother. She was found collapsed on the floor of her bedroom. As the crime scene reports indicated, she seemed to have died while in the middle of applying her makeup. More to follow. The husband, who was initially suspected to be the perpetrator, committed suicide a few days after. He was questioned for 48 hours, then released, due to return 24 hours later. He was found in his van in the garage of the block of flats. A hose was attached to the exhaust with the other end stuck in his window. The air vents were duct taped shut. The infant girl was never found and was passed on to the missing persons case officers. Although now I think she will never ever be found. When I visited the crime scene myself, things in the flat and some further evidence that I had collected just didn't seem right. I would even say unnatural. Together with a junior detective, I visited the scene roughly 70 hours after the incident took place. It was still classified as a warm crime scene. That is to say, things were mostly left untouched and as they were at the time of discovery. Some evidence was removed, however. I'll start with the kitchen. On the counter next to the sink were diced pumpkins, dried and crusty, and in a bowl next to it, some pieces had been mashed into a fine paste. This was presumably for the baby girl. The living room was otherwise normal. It was clean and well maintained. There was a large bookshelf on the southern wall of the room, which housed around 50 books. All of the books were in Korean, so naturally I couldn't understand the titles, but when I opened some of them, they all appeared to deal with subjects relating to the occult or traditional Korean pagan beliefs. I gathered this from the photographs and drawings. On the arm of the sofa, a book was open at a page which showed a zodiac calendar. It looked like a traditional Chinese one with all the animals around it. Next to this was a diary, the mother's, open at the yearly calendar page. A large red circle was around one of the dates. Incidentally, this was the date her body was found, and the day the daughter went missing. At this time, my partner mentioned he had a Korean friend growing up in London. He added that whenever he went to their house at night, all of the mirrors in the house were covered with sheets. He asked his friend about this, who embarrassingly said that it was a silly Korean superstition. At night, he was told, witches can enter this world through mirrors. They come to our world to steal babies and bring them back to hell with them. I shrugged this information off when I heard it. A silly superstition. I'd still like to believe that now. On the table in the middle of the room was a small bowl of half-eaten pumpkin mash. There had been something which the initial crime scene investigators had marked on the floor beside the table. There was a long line of something on the floor from just next to the table which ran across the room, through the kitchen, and into the parents' bedroom, incidentally the site of the mother's body. Taking a close look, I could see it was a long, thin streak of saliva, which contained traces of pumpkin. Every few feet or so between the living room table and the bedroom could be found small puddles of saliva with the pumpkin mixed with it. This suggests, as per the initial police report, that the baby had crawled from the table to the bedroom and came to a stop at the dresser. My partner asked for me permission to go and ask further questions of the residents living on the same floor, and I was left in the flat alone to continue my investigations into the other rooms. It was in the bedroom where I experienced something that to this day I cannot explain. I looked at the spot on the floor where the mother's body was found. The cause of death was ruled as a severe heart attack, and death was instant. This is in spite of her having no history of cardiac illness, nor any such instances in her immediate family. The photos of the body show her face up, her face suggesting she died in a state of shock or fear. Her eyes were wide open and bulging from their sockets, her mouth jarred agape as far as it could. She was frozen like this, as if someone had shown her a scary image and pressed pause on her reaction. That's the best way I can describe her state in the photograph. She was clutching a hairbrush, too. Now, I will tell you about the mirror that was sitting atop the dresser. It was a normal-looking vanity mirror, pearl inlay border, and propped up by a small stand at the back. It looked like an antique. Perhaps it's something I have acquired in my years on the job, call it an intuitive sense. But I could sense something coming from the mirror. It had a presence, one that was not existent in the other rooms. It was as if the mirror was the focal point of the entire room. It occupied the whole space, as if it were alive. What is more, anytime I turned away from it, I felt a sense of being watched. I know it sounds corny and cliched, but I know when I'm being watched. Not only watched, but menaced. It comes with the job and is a necessary survival tool for any law enforcement person. As I was standing in front of the mirror with my back to it looking at another part of the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of danger from behind. It felt like an impending blow to the head. There was definitely an intent to harm. Startled, I spun around. I immediately noticed my reflection in the mirror. The reflection was of me, of course. But it was me from behind. I was looking at myself from a position behind my body, as if through someone else's eyes. Then the image in the mirror started to slowly lurch toward me. In a flash, I pulled my firearm out of my hip holster and spun around. There was just an empty room, the same as it had been when I entered. I spun back around to face the mirror, gun still held at eye level, and the reflection was of me again, from the front. I stood like this for quite some time, half expecting the image in the mirror to change again. Once my heart stopped beating in my throat, I holstered my weapon and checked around the mirror for anything like a pinhole camera or other device that might make it possible to project an image on its surface from a remote source. A check of the bedroom also revealed no such devices. I decided to take the mirror as more evidence of the crime scene. Perhaps forensics can find something with it and, more to the point, find something that would give me peace of mind about what I had just seen. I put the mirror in a sealed plastic evidence bag and placed it on the back seat, then called my partner's radio to tell him we were leaving. The whole time driving back to the station, I had the sensation that someone was sitting in the back seat. So strong was the sensation, and still feeling rattled from what I experienced in the flat, I grew fearsome of looking in the rearview mirror. After handing in the mirror to the forensics team, I decided to look over the case photos again, and as I did so, I became aware of a terrifying similarity. All of the deceased, including my senior, who passed several days before, all had the same expression on their face. The only words to describe it would be pure horror. The ways their eyes had distended in terror, their mouths distorted in their final scream or plea for mercy, and the way they all seemed to be trying to escape from whatever they were seeing. The mother's body was turned in one direction, her head twisted in the other. The father had his head buried into the cushions of the back seat of the car, and the senior detective was cowering in fear at the back of his closet, which contained a full-length mirror. All three had died in front of a mirror of some sort. Had they seen what I saw? That day as I was leaving, I happened to bump into the forensics officer whom I handed the mirror to. "Evening, sir," he said. "We had a spot of trouble with your mirror." "Oh?" I said. "Yeah, we couldn't get to the handprint that was left on it." I hadn't a clue what he was talking about. There may indeed have been a handprint on it, but in my haste to leave I failed to notice it. "Handprint?" I asked. "Yeah, tiny little thing, like this." He spread his thumb and index finger apart to indicate the size of the hand. I'd say they were around 8 or 9 months old, definitely an infant. He shook his head in disbelief. This sent an ice-cold wave of recognition through me. It must belong to the daughter. "What do you mean you couldn't get to it?" I asked. He waited for 2 other staff to walk past and out of earshot before he answered. "Well, the handprint, sir." He looked around again. It had been put on the glass from the other side. "Other side of what?" I asked. "The mirror," he said. My stomach sank, and I instantly thought of the things my partner had told me about the superstitions involving mirrors. "Are you sure?" I pressed him. "We're fairly sure, sir. We've taken thousands of prints from glass surfaces and other reflective materials, but we've never seen something like this." He held up his hands. "It's a mystery." I started to feel lightheaded. He patted me on the shoulder. "But that's for you guys to solve, right?" With that cheerful jibe, he left me standing confused and exhausted in the corridor. I remained that way until his footsteps receded out of earshot. The mirror was never used as evidence, and it was consigned to a file cabinet somewhere in storage, never to be taken out or spoken of again. The handprint was just passed off as a manufacturing defect. The whole case is now cold, unsolved. 2 sudden deaths of natural causes, a missing child, and a suicide from being unable to cope with the grief. That's how it ended. For me, however, I cover every mirror in the house when the sun goes down. Story. I am a detective currently working with a private company to solve old mysteries. I think I just solved the Eileen Moore lighthouse disappearances. Let me address a couple of things first. I use Reddit a lot. I am just using a throwaway so that no one that I know in real life can trace this back to me. Also, no one knows I am working on this case, and no one will know for another 4 months or so. If my findings are proven correct, we will publish our results, and that is when this information, along with my name and the name of my company, will be made public. So please forgive me, but I must refrain from using specifics in this write-up. But the findings were so unsettling that I felt compelled to share it with someone. I figure if only a small group of people see it, then there is no harm, no foul. Also, if you haven't heard of this unsolved mystery, then you should read about it here before reading my report. The mystery itself is unsettling. Anyways, on with the report. I had worked for various police departments throughout my career as a detective. I began solving murder mysteries that others before me had failed to. This began to create a reputation for my professional career. I was known around the detective world as one of the best. This is why I was hired around 5 months ago by a private company, whose name will remain hidden for reasons I previously stated. I got an eerily generic email from this company that said they would like to interview me for a private job. This was not unusual, but what was unusual was the fact that the interview was in Britain, along with the job. I was hesitant, but because I hadn't started a family yet, I decided to try for the job. This company paid for my flight over, and we met to discuss exactly what I would be hired to investigate and what they expected from me. This was not a normal interview. I was already chosen for the job, if I accepted, and they told me straight up that they expected a definitive conclusion to their mystery. Anything less, and I wouldn't be paid. This was incredibly unusual, but the pay was so high, and I was so confident in my abilities, that I decided to attempt to solve the case. the company assigned me to the Eilean Moor Lighthouse mystery. What basically happened is that there were 3 experienced lighthouse keepers that were discovered missing by the boat sent to pick them up at the end of their 3-month shifts. What was unusual about the disappearances is how there were no bodies found. Also, the lighthouse was left unattended in what seemed like a hasty decision. There was half-eaten food on the table and doors open, etc. The strangest part, however, is the log that was found during the initial investigation. The log was written by one of the 3 members, and it was pretty normal until the last 3 days. In these entries, the man wrote about his colleagues crying and complaining about a huge storm. They were all complaining about this storm that they had never seen anything like. The last entry simply said, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." The scariest fact about this case is that there were no recorded storms in the area during the days the logs were written. Let me remind you, this actually happened. This isn't some made-up conspiracy. This is cold, hard evidence. The event took place in the year 1900. I can't repeat it enough to myself, and to you all, this actually happened. Investigating this case, I have learned one thing. Seeing is truly not believing, because I didn't believe what I had discovered as I was working on this case. But it is all real, I can assure you. I started about 2 weeks after my interview and flew to Scotland, where I then took a boat to the island. The island is still home to a functioning lighthouse with living crew members there that stand at their posts every day. I talked to the 3 men working at the lighthouse at the time and introduced myself. I told them I would be living with them while I was trying to solve the case, and they were all delighted by the idea of company. After getting settled for a day or 2, I started my investigation by interviewing the crew members currently stationed on the island. They all noted strange things that happen every now and then, such as voices telling them to jump off the edge, and other voices saying things like, "He is waiting for you. He will get you soon." They say they only hear it individually, but they all have heard the voices, and they all talk about it and agree to just shrug it off. I continued investigating the island and its physical features for the next week or so. That week added no new insight to my investigation, although it did give me a better idea of what our missing people were working with when they died. Honestly, the next month of my investigation didn't offer any new insight. It wasn't until I started hearing the voices for myself that I finally made some progress in my case. The voices began talking to me after I had been on the island for exactly a month. Unlike the crew members, I listened to the voices when they didn't tell me to jump off of something or try and harm myself. These voices would say things like, "Go down to the dock, you'll see him there." I would go down to the docks and wait, and there would be nothing. Just clear waters and knotted ropes. I didn't know who he was, but when I would respond to these voices, they would never answer back. Eventually, the voices began telling me to search in the cellar of the lighthouse for the answers that I sought. I followed their orders and went to the cellar. This is where things got weird. At the cellar door, it was chained with a big red X on the door. I thought about asking the crewmates if I should go, but they were on their job and I promised not to disturb them while they were on duty. I unchained the door and entered in slowly. I had to use my phone as a flashlight because there were no lights in that place. As I finally made it to the bottom, I realized that this room was completely pointless. There was nothing of value to the crewmates or the lighthouse as a whole. Honestly, I was expecting a storage room or a generator or something, but instead it was a dark, blank room lined with cement blocks and wooden floor that supported one bland chair. The room was blank for the most part, except for one sentence written in red on the cement wall. It read, "I didn't do it, he made me." I was unnerved, and that is saying something, because I have seen a lot of shit on this job, and I've never let my fear get the better of me, but I couldn't help it here. I ran upstairs and laid in my bed until diner time. Diner is when I get to talk to the crewmates. Most of the time we talk about my findings and how their day went. It's not much, really, but whatever. All they care about is the company. Well, that night I decided to bring the cellar up to them. Right when I mentioned it, they all looked up from their food at once. They knew what I was talking about, but they tried to play dumb. "Huh? What cellar?" I wasn't buying it, so I continued to explain it by saying, "The door with a red X on it." They knew that I knew. They had to come clean and tell me what was up with that room. They said that every 2 weeks or so, they would all wake up in the morning lying on the floor of the cellar. They would have cuts on their wrists, and there would be one knife lying in the center of them. They said they always woke up with their bodies forming a triangle-like shape. They also told me that once I arrived, the voices stopped, and with them, so did the cellar. I asked them who wrote that sentence on the wall and who was he. They responded saying that they wondered who he was for a while, and they don't know who wrote that on the wall. They assumed it was someone who was stationed at the lighthouse before them. I wrote down my findings and warned them not to keep secrets from me again. After 2 more weeks of investigating that cellar as best as I could without going into it, it happened to me. I woke up the next morning lying on the wood floor with no recollection of how I got there. There were cuts all up my arms, and I was lying in an odd position. I arose, horrified, when I saw a small light creak from under the door. I ran to the door and flung it open. The crewmates were all sitting eating breakfast, and they were unresponsive to the scene I was making in the kitchen. When I noticed they weren't responding, I walked up to one of them and moved in to tap him on the shoulder. But before I could, her turned to look at me. His face was emotionless, his eyes were completely black, and much larger than usual. He didn't blink, he just stared straight into my soul. I was horrified. As I backed up, he slowly stood, maintaining eye contact with me, and the other 2 rose with him. They all started walking to me slowly, all the while chanting in a low hum. "He's gonna get you. He's gonna get you." I passed out before they got to me, and woke up to a bucket of water being splashed onto my face by the same people who were cornering me a second ago. This time, they were normal, their faces filled with fear, like they knew what I had just gone through. I asked them what time it was, and they said that it was 4 p.m. on Tuesday. I passed out on a Sunday. They said they had all experienced it, and they just prayed that it would go away. They told me that the visions only feel like a few minutes, but last 2 days or so. I asked them why they didn't wake me, and they told me that I was locked in the cellar, and they have tried to break the door down while their colleagues were locked in the cellar. But it is pointless. It never budges. They also said they could hear me screaming at the top of my lungs in the most unimaginable pitch for hours on end. They told me it was normal. Another week had passed, and I moved on by doing exactly what the crewmates did. I shrugged it off. When something that surreal happens to you, all you can do is just shrug it off. Your mind doesn't let you accept that it was real. The next morning, we heard the ship that was sent to pick us up and replace us with new crewmates. I began to pack my belongings when I realized I couldn't find my Bible. I brought it with me on the trip for God knows what reason. I never look at it, but I always keep it with me. And now, I couldn't find it. It sat in the drawer of my nightstand every night, and now when I was leaving, it disappeared. I asked the crewmates if they had seen it, and they all told me they had no idea where it was. I shrugged it off, something that had become a habit of sorts for me, and headed to the boat. Right as I stepped foot onto the boat, I just felt different. It felt like a weight had just come off of my chest. It felt freeing. On our trip back, I asked my crewmates if we should talk about what happened on the island, or just keep it a secret, and something strange happened. They looked at me baffled. They had no clue what I was talking about. I told them, "Nice one, but seriously." And they just stared at me, confused. I began to try and jog their memories, but they genuinely had no clue what I was talking about. They claimed I may have gone a little crazy being on the island and not being around a lot of people for a couple of months. I was angered. I thought they were playing a joke on me, and maybe they were, but I tried to exchange contact info with them before we parted ways after the boat had docked in Scotland. They responded by saying, "We don't bring our business lives into our personal lives. Sorry, mate. Have a good one." And they waved to me and left in a cab. I sat there reviewing my notes from the island, and I kept wondering, were they trying to trick me? Were they joking? Or did they really not remember? And if they didn't, why am I the only one that does? That's when I remembered the missing Bible. I remembered the he that was written in that cellar. I remembered the cellar itself and the days that I spent sleeping in it, apparently. I didn't know what to make of it until I thought about the Bible again. Why would he take my Bible? Was he offended by it? And how does he have the power to control time? I examined the evidence for days and finally drew the conclusion. That island was home to the Antichrist. That was the only way. There is no way someone of this earth has the power to control time and the minds of humans. It had to be the Antichrist. I submitted my findings to the company that employed me, and they are reviewing the evidence right now. If my claim is somehow proven, I don't know how they could ever prove it, then you will see a report with my findings published in a couple of months. Along with it, you will also probably see thousands of articles about how I am insane and crazy. But that is why I am telling you guys now, before I'm published. It happened, it was real, and I just had to share it with someone. One question still haunts me though. What does God is over all mean? Story. Someone leaked my personal details onto the dark web. Now everyone I love is being hunted down. To be perfectly honest, I was never a fan of all that dark web stuff. I mean, it's interesting enough and all, but I never had the patience, nor technological know-how, to figure out how to use it productively. In fact, my whole family seems to be missing the technology genes. We've struggled with everything from computers and phones to toasters and microwaves. My mother even got scammed a few times before she passed away. Luckily, she never lost anything more than a few $100s, but it still stung. Francis, my best friend, on the hand was a tech whiz. He loved that stuff and never shied away from looking up the most bizarre and horrific things online. If he could reach it, he would. He even tried to set up a Tor browser on my computer once, but I just ended up ignoring it, somehow deleting the shortcut and losing track of where he placed it. Still, he'd periodically send me pictures from Alphabet, which is apparently some dark web black market. It was mostly strange or illegal products. Other times he'd find impossible, random conspiracies. It was usually weird and funny stuff. But sometimes he'd send me darker things, pictures of murder victims, videos displaying horrific car crashes and other accidents. It made me appreciate our friendship a little less, but Francis was all around a good guy, albeit an eccentric one. We stuck together. On the rare occasion that he crossed a line, I'd just politely ask him to stop, which would work for a while. Then, after the shock had worn off, he'd send more stuff he found on the dark web. It would always start off so innocent, with funny pictures or forums, but it inevitably got darker, escalating to more disturbing areas of the dark web. The most horrific thing he ever sent me, however, was little more than a picture of myself, found randomly out there in the sea of onion sites. It was just a screenshot he'd sent, with a picture of myself and some text lined up next to it. In a way, it looked like a profile for some sort of social media page, but it was plain, simple, and seemingly pointless. It contained my name, birth date, address, everything. "I'm so sorry, Tyler. I don't know how they found you," Francis sent me as a message. "What do you mean? Who are they? What's going on?" I asked back in a flood of questions. "Did you open any suspicious emails or sign up for something weird online?" I tried to think back. I couldn't remember anything that stood out, but in my business I dealt with hundreds of mails each day from various clients. "I don't know. Francis, what's going on? Your name is on Alicia, listed as a participant. What the hell is Alicia?" "A red room. It was supposed to be closed down, but it's back." I chuckled at his remark. I wasn't much of a tech genius, but even I knew red rooms were little more than myths told to scare teenagers and gullible adults. "Come on, man. This is a joke, right? Red rooms aren't real." "I think this one is." After that, I'd reached the maximum amount of Francis antics that I could handle. I told him to back off and leave me alone for a bit, which had become somewhat of a routine between the two of us. Still, I took his warning serious enough to dial the non-emergency line to the police. I explained the situation, but they didn't take it seriously. After all, my personal information leaked on a website shouldn't have been much of a threat. They just told me to call back if anything more substantial happened. I went about my week, and nothing came of the mysterious website. Francis even admitted he might have overreacted a tad. Truth is, most people have their email information leaked somewhere online. Even passwords and personal details are readily available all over the place. But for most people, that's just useless information. Then about a month later, I received a letter in my mail. It didn't have a return address, nor any stamps. It was just a plain envelope put in my mailbox. The only way I could have received it would be if someone had personally delivered it themselves. I opened the letter to find a perfectly black paper inside, with little more than a single line of text in the middle. It was just a string of random numbers and letters, ending in .onion to mark the fact that it was a dark web page. At first, I didn't even connect the dots. I had long since forgotten the fact that all my personal details had been leaked. Instead of just throwing it away as I should have, I decided to contact Francis. He was more intrigued than worried, showing up about 15 minutes later to help me connect to the website. He only needed about a second to dig up the Tor browser and input the Onion link I'd received. "Shit," he mumbled as the title of the site popped up. It was Alicia. "That's the site that has my name?" I asked to be sure. Francis nodded. A few seconds passed as the site loaded, before a black video player popped up in the center of the screen. It didn't have a timer or anything to let us know the duration of the video. Instead, it just had a play button. Francis clicked it, and though it was too dark to see what was going on, I could hear something in the background. "Turn up the volume," I said. Francis did as commanded, and we were greeted with the muffled sounds of someone struggling. It was quiet, just loud enough to make out what was going on, without understanding the hidden context. Then it got brighter, just enough to make out the walls and ceiling of a small room. In the center lay a man tied to a bed with chains, his face obscured by a bag pulled over his head. "What the hell is this?" I asked. It's a red room." "Well, turn that shit off." Francis was reluctant to oblige, whether it be due to curiosity or shock. Before I could reach out and turn it off myself, a man entered the picture. He was naked, with his bare chest covered in old scars and fresh blood. He pulled the mask off the tied-up man, and I let out a loud gasp. "What is it?" Francis said. I pointed a trembling finger towards the screen. That's Mr. Dawson, my boss." "You sure?" I nodded. "Is this a live stream or something?" "No, I don't think so. As far as I know, you can't live stream on the dark web. It has to be a recording." I wanted so desperately to just turn it off and call the police, but we were both frozen in our seats. The naked man pulled out a knife from a bag on the ground and started peeling off pieces of skin from Dawson's leg. He tried to scream in agony, but he was gagged, left unable to move or even call for help. Little by little, the man cut off pieces of flesh from Dawson, moving his way from the legs to the torso. I can't say exactly how long the video went on for. It skipped minutes at the time, showing Dawson at progressively more mutilated stages of the torture. It wasn't until his skin had been almost completely removed before he finally lost consciousness. I threw up, finally snapping back to reality as the screen turned black. Francis sat speechless in his chair, but what could we do? Dawson had to have been dead by the time we even opened the link. Naturally, I called the police and gave them all the information about the website that I had. But by the time the police got around to checking it out, the video was gone. Once it had been viewed, it was simply removed. They believed us, though, saying that they'd forward the information to the appropriate sources, which turned out to be the FBI. There was little more I could do. Without solid evidence that my boss had actually died, he was just reported missing while the investigation went on. I was questioned by various officers and an FBI agent a couple of times, but that was about it. A year passed, and life went on. My place of work just hired a new manager, and Dawson's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. I fully believed that would be the end of it. I thought the horrors I'd witnessed would be a one-time occurrence, that I would be fine. During that time, I also drifted away from Francis. We weren't even able to look each other in the eyes anymore, not after what we'd seen together. Then everything changed, as I got another letter in the mail. It was unmarked without an address, just like before. That time, however, I didn't hesitate to call the police. I already knew what would be inside, and I wasn't about to ruin another piece of evidence. The police redirected me to the responsible FBI agent who was working the case. He was quick to act, coming to pick me up within the hour alongside 3 armed agents. "Mr. Larkin, I'm Agent Vance. We need to come with us," he said before they rushed me inside the car as if my life depended on it. They took me to an office building in the middle of the city and made me wait in an interrogation room while they checked out the evidence. I sat there with a cup of water, 100 thoughts running through my mind. An hour passed before Agent Vance came to check up on me. He looked upset, but had put on a brave face to talk to me. "We checked out the link in your envelope, and found a video like the one you described last time. We've taken some still shots of the footage, and I'd like it if you could help identify the victim." I shuddered at the thought, but agreed to help. Vance guided me into a room full of computers. A group of office workers sat in front of one, staring at a picture, trying to figure out who the person was. They didn't need to analyze it any further, because I knew exactly who it was: Francis. He looked absolutely horrified, the still picture showing him clearly alive, but for how long that would last, I didn't know. "Izzy," I began to ask. "He didn't survive. I'm sorry," Vance interjected, knowing what I wanted to ask. "How did he die?" "It's better you don't know the details, but we're going to catch this guy, I promise you that much." Again, we went over each and every detail. They promised over and over they'd do everything in their power to chase down the people doing it and to keep me safe. But as weeks turned to months, no culprit was caught. Eventually, I stopped working. Instead, I just hid at home, afraid that anyone remotely close to me might be next. I didn't have much in terms of family, no siblings, and my parents had long since died. I suppose that made me an easy target for the runners of the Red Room. Despite the FBI's best efforts, the letters kept coming with random intervals. My ex-girlfriend was the next victim. Though we'd broken up a few years earlier, we'd remained friendly. Again, I got the link to a video of her brutal murder. I just forwarded it to the FBI, unable to stomach another horror show. Then they took one of my old coworkers. One by one, they killed the people I knew and loved, and I could do nothing to stop it. I couldn't even contact the culprits and ask what the hell they wanted from me. But then it hit me. I was being tortured, and while it wasn't physical like the others, it was still mental torture. Like the horrors they'd committed on my friends, the pain wouldn't end until I was dead. Maybe that's what they so desperately wanted, for me to kill myself. Maybe it was some sort of sick game to see how long I could last. I sat down in front of my computer, ready to give up. If there was even the slightest chance that it would save lives, I had to do it. I looked up the best ways to do it, but in the end, I decided to go for the gun. I picked it up, pressed it against my temple. I felt like hours passed, but I just couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger without letting every possible scenario run through my mind. Then the phone rang, and I almost dropped the gun in shock. I glanced at my phone to see a call incoming from an unknown number. "Hello?" I asked as I picked it up. "Not like that," a twisted robotic voice said from the other end. "Not like what? Who are you?" "You need to record it properly," the voice continued. Whoever they were using some kind of voice-changing software to make them unrecognizable. "How did you?" I began, before noticing the camera on my computer. Of course they'd been watching. I didn't even need to ask. I just stared at the camera, and the mysterious person on the other end confirmed. "That's right, we've been watching you." I felt my heart drop. So all I have to do is to kill myself, and the suffering ends? Yes, face the camera when you do it. You have 15 minutes, or the next person will be taken. I don't have any other options. I can't let anyone else die because of me. I just pray that once I'm gone, it'll finally stop. Story. I'm the chef that cooks death row inmates their last meal. My secret ingredient came back to bite me. The botched execution of Norton Carraway, the most prolific serial killer you've never heard of, should have made national headlines for weeks. But Carraway was so much more than your average garden variety killer, and the factors that made his case so special also made it embarrassing for powerful people with means to make unsightly stories go away. That meant in the hours that followed, I had very little information to go on, just the details I'd seen firsthand in the witness gallery, and the gnawing feeling it was all my fault. I paced until I thought I'd wear a hole in my apartment floor, replaying the events in the hopes that some logical explanation would let me off the hook. Guards led Carraway into the chamber, scalp shaved bald. They restrained him in the electric chair, the method he had fought in court to have over lethal injection. When the executioner threw the lever, Carraway convulsed. I kept waiting for the shaking to stop. Instead, it worsened. I don't think I'll ever forget the screaming and the smell of burning skin. Prison staff shut the curtains to the witness gallery and rushed us out. I left knowing he was still alive, and silently prayed with each passing moment that I would get the call confirming his death. When my cell phone finally did ring, it was Warden Paul Perkins, calling from his personal number. I answered. "Hello? We need to talk about Caraway's last meal." My blood felt cold. What did he know? How could he know? I don't. In person. I've never driven so fast. It's a miracle I didn't get pulled over. I reached the penitentiary before dawn. Place looks like an old high school, wrapped up in barbed wire. An uneasy silence filled the long, sterile corridors. The guards I passed looked twitchy and unnerved. The whole prison seemed to be on its feet, waiting for something. The warden greeted me in his modest office, all bookshelves and filing cabinets, with a small window overlooking the plains. "It's been a long night." He gestured toward 2 steaming mugs of coffee on his desk. "Sit, drink." I obeyed. "I didn't think you stayed for executions," Paul said. "Usually don't." The warden lowered himself into his chair with a huff. Why was last night different? I studied his pudgy face, normally bright, kind, and clean-shaven. This morning, his eyes were bloodshot. "A victim approached me," I said. "Give him a grain of truth, something he may know anyway." It made this case feel more personal. "Who?" "Rebecca," I said. "She tracked me down and knocked on my door." The poor woman had looked so thin, like she'd forgotten to eat. Mismatched, wrinkled clothes. Paul just looked at me, expectant. I continued. "I felt awful for her, so I invited her in, made her dinner, then let her talk about her daughter. Among other things. Oh, if only she had just gone home. I know you were doing a nice thing, but I'd be careful around her," Paul said. He took a sip of coffee and smacked his lips. "When Rebecca's daughter went missing, did you know that she was the prime suspect?" "No, I didn't. A lot of people up in that tiny town still believe Rebecca is the strangler. Seems none of them are eager to open those old wounds." Paul set the coffee down. "In the early days, back when it was only a disappearance, a canine officer paid her a visit. He wanted one of Daniela's favorite stuffed animals, something to let the dogs catch her scent. Know what they found?" I shook my head. "Weird stuff, Kathy. Runes, weird little dolls, and animal bones. She told the cops she'd been doing a ritual to bring her baby back," Paul said. "She couldn't tell them where she was when Daniela went missing. So they booked her. Caraway was well-trained, disciplined, waited as long as he could, I expect. But that urge," he trailed off. "He couldn't help himself, I expect. Had I given too much away in mentioning Rebecca? Point is, Rebecca might not have done anything to her daughter. But she's not safe or sane," Paul said. "I'm getting sidetracked, though. The execution. You stayed out of sympathy, then?" "Sure, you could call it that." "Okay." Paul nodded. "Well, things got a bit hectic after you left. Shall I fill you in?" I nodded. Executioner cut off the power at the 20-minute mark. Way longer than it's supposed to take. Paul took a deep breath. By that point, Caraway looked like a half-spent candle. Bastard wasn't just alive, he was coherent, begging for death. "How is that possible?" I asked. I knew exactly how. The question was, did the warden? "Problem with the chair, maybe." The warden shrugged. I made the call to override his wishes. He got the lethal injection and stopped breathing at 3:45. Caraway was dead. I relaxed a little in my chair, but tried not to show a change in my posture. "Why did you get into this job, Kathy?" Paul asked. The shift in questioning caught me off guard. Where was he going with this? "Honestly?" I asked. "I hate when you say that," he said. "Implies you've been dishonest about everything else." I picked a terrible time to be a chef. Restaurants going under right and left. What was it, 25% in the whole country that year? Something like that, Paul agreed. Any halfway decent owner wanted a chef with serious culinary experience. Sleazy ones wanted to get me on server staff, so they could see my ass in one of those tiny uniform skirts, I said. You were my only option. Cooking last meals for death row inmates has its perks, Paul said. No bad reviews to worry about. No repeat customers either. The ideal learning environment. He curled his lips into a smile. But that was years ago. You've got your degree now. More than enough talent and experience. Anyone would have hired you. The challenge, I said. I mean, you're cooking someone's last meal. You only get one of those. Unless you're Norton Carraway. No other reason? The warden asked. I answered honestly. Number. He leaned in. You didn't ever like to mess with them? Who? The prisoners. You ever mess with their food? He knew, and he saw it in my eyes. What's going on? Engineer took a look at the chair. Paul bit his lip and shook his head. Nothing wrong with it. So after Carraway's heart stopped, I ordered an autopsy. Maybe he had some freak medical condition. I don't know what I was expecting. The warden went on, his voice starting to shake with anger. You know what I find? What? DNA. A victim's DNA. Daniela's blood, mixed in with the food in Carraway's stomach and intestines. My face felt prickly. Stress sweat tricked down my forehead, stinging my eyes. Her what? I'm asking you this as a courtesy, because I consider you a friend. Did you tamper with Carraway's last meal? I opened my mouth. And before you answer, he cut me off. Keep in mind what's going to happen here. Sure, the state wants to keep this one low profile, but they'll still need to at least investigate what went wrong. Might do their own autopsy. Maybe take a look at your other meals. I need to know how long this has been going on. Was this always some karmic justice for you? Like spitting in a rude customer's food on a just sick level? Paul, you don't understand. I'm sorry, Kathy, I've got to fire you. You can walk away clean. If you don't make a fuss, I don't think they will either. Food tampering? Then it clicked. Paul only thought I'd been tampering with their food. He harbored no suspicions anything supernatural even happened. He didn't know what I'd done. The ritual that evil woman had convinced me to play a part in. I thought back to Rebecca and the vial she had given me, along with a tattered recipe card. Execution is too good for him, she'd said. Feed Carraway this and he will never know peace. Where had she gotten her daughter's blood for the concoction? Why did the lethal injection work when the electric chair failed? A blaring siren from some distant watchtower answered my second question. Prisoner escape, the warden muttered under his breath. He reached for his phone. Before it was halfway from its cradle to his ear, a corrections officer barged into the room, panting. What's happened? Are you all right? Paul gestured to the front of his uniform, soaked in blood. It's not mine. Then whose? Who's down? The coroner. The warden had gotten halfway to his feet when he froze, his brow wrinkled. Wait, then who's missing? Carraway. My breath caught in my throat. Carraway's body is gone. Autopsy report too. Someone must have broken in and dragged it off. They can't have gotten far. How many hurt? Half dozen, the officer panted. Pretty badly too. I don't know about Hopkins and Clark. Medics are with them, but the officer trailed off. How about you? You're not wounded, Paul asked. No, sir. Good. You'll need to keep Kathy safe in my office until those freaks are caught. You'd have to be some special kind of screwed up to try stealing a famous killer's body. Yeah, I agreed. He jabbed one of his sausage fingers in my direction. Don't think I'm done with you. This isn't over. He had no idea how right he was. The corrections officers didn't catch them. Little did they know, there wasn't a them to catch. A member of the riot team made raving claims, said he'd fired dozens of rounds into the charred, disemboweled corpse of Norton Carraway. He just kept coming, howling in pain the whole time. The warden's preferred explanation felt equally far-fetched to me. The unnameable agency that had honed Carraway into a ruthless instrument of death wanted his body for some clandestine purpose, so they took it. Staff buried an empty box in the prison cemetery and pretended the night had never happened. Theories of witchcraft, or an undead man fighting his way out of the penitentiary, never crossed anyone's mind. If everyone was willing to forget, perhaps I could too. But I couldn't. He had the warden's autopsy report, the one that raised questions about his last meal, and the woman who cooked it. I kept thinking of the way he studied me, how normal he'd looked. He was average height and in decent shape. Neat, combed hair, atop a round face, with a small nose. Nothing about him was intimidating or even remarkable. difficult to pick out of a lineup. Paul quietly let me go from my job at the prison. Felt like I got off easy for what I did. I decided to put my talents to other uses. I'm working on setting up a non-profit that helps provide hot meals to victims' families. Setting it all up involved a lot of phone calls to try and secure money. That meant a lot of unknown numbers popping up on my caller ID. So when my cell rang one weekday evening, I answered without hesitation. "Hello, Kathy speaking. Kathy, I've just learned the most interesting recipe. You should cook it for that charity of yours." The voice was wheezy and labored. "It's to die for." The caller let out a laugh somewhere between cackle and coughing fit. "Who is this?" I demanded, but I knew. Rebecca told me everything I needed to know, in the end. "Told me how to reverse what you bitches did to me," Caraway said. "The bullets weren't the worst of it. Frying in that chair, being paralyzed while they cut me open to dig around in my guts," he raved. "I felt everything. I still feel everything. The pain is constant." I kept the phone close to my ear, turning on the spot to ensure my windows and doors were secured. I kept expecting the man's marred remains to leap out at me. "But you can take that pain away," Caraway rasped. "I'd be honored, Kathy, if you'd have me over for dinner." My phone buzzed with a text message notification. A new image, bony fingers wrapped in disfigured skin, pinched the edges of a recipe card. "Dinner for two," I read aloud. The witch could only push around pain and suffering from one person to the next. "Daniela to me, and now me to you," Caraway said. "Follow those instructions, and you'll have a proper last meal for me." "And for me?" I asked. Caraway laughed. "You'll take on my suffering, every pinprick of pain I've felt since I ate that cursed dinner you served me. It's a heavy burden, I admit." "If I refuse?" "I'd hoped your conscience might get the better of you, or at least some sense of responsibility for what you unleashed." He sighed, his labored breath crackling in the receiver. "Rebecca said we both needed to eat willingly. I can't force you to cook or eat, but I can certainly persuade you." "How?" "Use your imagination. Watch. Give me a ring when you've seen enough." The call ended. I called the police, lied about some vague phone threats from a stalker. An officer came to search the house. When he found nothing, he promised he would be in the area and gave me his number. I was so worried about my physical safety that I never quite wrapped my head around what the madman actually threatened me with. He's careful, but I can see his pattern in the disappearances and killings that go unsolved. I've unleashed a quiet terror on the world, a man who craves death, who cannot be killed, and whom no one is looking for. And he wants to make me pay. I know what I have to do to stop him. I know I'm the only one who can, but I'm scared of what it means to take on that pain myself. Every time I think I'm strong enough, I think back to those screams of agony from the witness gallery and the smell of burning flesh. Maybe justice can wait a little longer? Story: The Silent Call. I'm David, and I have been a call handler for Cambridgeshire Police for 5 years, mostly working on emergency 999 calls. In that time, I must have taken hundreds of Silent Nines calls. A silent call isn't always silent. It's just how we refer to a call where the caller isn't responsive and no request for the police has been made. They are mostly people accidentally pocket dialing, but you always have to go through the routine of trying to get a response, checking the phone number against previous calls to see if there is any history to suggest someone may be in danger, listening for any background noise to suggest any distress or disturbance. If there is a reason for concern, we will dispatch someone to check. Usually there isn't any concern and the incident log is closed off without any further action. This call wasn't that unusual. An operator transfers the call though and states the basic facts. No request made for police. Possible breathing was heard down the line, but that wasn't very clear due to the background noise, which was, quite irritatingly, the theme tune to Peppa Pig. So many silent calls are from children playing with phones while sitting in front of the television, so again, this wasn't too unusual. The line was still open, so I tried to engage with the caller. "You're through to the police, is anyone there?" No response. "If you can hear me, can you press a button on the keypad or make a noise?" Still no response. I did some system checks. There was a history of calls from this number from 7 years ago, but these were all marked restricted, so I couldn't see any details. After a while, satisfied there was no apparent emergency, I stopped trying and announced that I would be ending the call. Just as I pressed the button on my phone to hang up, I heard a voice. "Hello," it said just as I cut it off. I instantly called back. The line answered, but again there was no response. Peppa Pig still played in the background, but not a full episode, just the theme tune on repeat. Once again, it got to the point of ending the call, and just as I pressed the button to hang up, hell, for fuck's sake. Before calling back again, I slid off my headset and walked over to the supervisor, advising him I had a silent call with restricted history to see if he could check the details for any reason for ongoing concern. I sat back at my desk ready to call back, and the supervisor came over to me, quicker than I expected. "Don't worry about that history," he said nonchalantly. "They're old incidents and it won't be the same caller. Might not even be the right number, could just be a glitch on the line. If there's nothing new on the call, get rid of it." I know it sounds harsh, but it wasn't unusual for us to be that blunt about a 999 call. We deal with so many. If there is no sign of distress or disturbance, we can't waste any more time on it. A real emergency call could be waiting. It wasn't unusual for call logs to be restricted either, usually because they contained information on other staff members or their families. Sometimes because the incident related to some ongoing operation only high-ranking officers should see. I decided to give the line one last call back. It rang and picked up as before. The Peppa Pig theme played on a loop. "Hello?" She sounded weak and confused. "Can you hear me? I've been trying for so long to get through. Why won't anyone help me?" "Why have you called us? What is the problem?" I asked. She went silent for a while, then, "Nobody will help me. I keep calling. Can you help me?" "What is your name?" I asked. "Nicole." She paused. "I think. Please help me. David, help me." Then the line went dead. I hadn't told her my name. Maybe someone else called David was there. I called her back. "Stop calling me. Just come and help me, please. My daughter is here. We need help." "Where are you?" I asked, trying to get the key information to send someone out. 37 Butterfield Road. She sounded panicked, breathing heavily. "Please help." While she was talking, I was already updating my incident, entering the address and sending it for dispatch. "I'm going to get someone right out to you. What's happening?" The line cleared. I transferred the incident to the dispatchers on an immediate grade, the highest priority grade for attendance. I didn't understand what was going on, but someone was in distress, with presumably a young child present. We needed to attend. While I was updating the notes on the incident log, the system kicked me out. The incident became restricted, and the details on the incident list replaced with restricted. It wasn't unusual for this to happen, so only the dispatcher and the control room inspector, known as Oscar 1, could see the incident, while still sending someone out to the address. I couldn't understand why this was restricted, but that is above my pay grade. Nicole kept calling throughout my shift. She was getting increasingly agitated and afraid. I assured her someone was coming out, but after an hour, I started to doubt this was the case. I spoke to my supervisor. They said they would ask Oscar 1. Oscar 1 said this was even above them. They have been told not to attend. It was being dealt with by another department as part of an existing operation. My shift came to an end at 2 a.m. Before then, Nicole had called a few more times. I kept telling her someone was dealing with it, but I don't think she believed me. She started to get angrier with me. She kept shouting her address at me, 37 Butterfield Road, desperate for someone to come and help her. She was screaming my name at me, the name I had never told her. I noticed on my mapping system that I knew the road. It was near my route home. I was glad to take off my headset when 2 a.m. came. I got in my car and drove home. Guided by compulsion, I drove down Butterfield Road. I wondered if someone may be there to help by now. I looked out for number 37, but I couldn't find it. It was a normal residential road, but in the middle, there was a gap between houses 35 and 39, which was filled with small trees, well-maintained bushes, and a flower bed. I drove up and down the road a couple of times to check I had the right place, then stopped at a 24-hour off-license further down the road. I went into the shop to buy a can of Coke for an excuse to ask the lady at the till where number 37 was. She seemed unimpressed, rolling her eyes at me. "Nicole's house?" she asked. "You're a few years too late to see it. They knocked it down to stop all you true crime nuts coming to gawp at it." Once I had paid, she shoved my drink back across the counter at me. "It's been almost a decade now. You'd think people would let that poor family rest." I left. Clearly the lady wasn't going to entertain any more questions from me. I got in the car and immediately went on my phone to search the internet for references to what happened at Nicole's house. I found an old local news story headline from 7 years ago referencing the murder of her and her children, and another more recent article suggesting the murder remained unsolved. But my search was interrupted by a phone call from an unknown number. I had to answer. "David," Nicole shouted. "David, where are they? You promised me help was coming." I didn't know what to say, largely because I didn't know what was happening. What was I really talking to? I can't help you." The line cleared. Then straight away, another call, Nicole screaming. A child cried out in fear in the background. The line cleared again. The phone rang. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again, and again. I couldn't answer again. Would these calls continue? I couldn't take it. I got out of the car and walked to the memorial garden where 37 Butterfield Road once stood. The flower bed occasionally glittered with gold in the streetlight. I went over and knelt down for a closer look, and the ground littered with other SIM cards. Even whole phones had been discarded there. Some were old and partially submerged in the dirt, but others were fresh. Some were clean enough they could have been scattered here within days. I looked at my phone and considered adding my SIM card to the garden. "You too?" a man said from behind me with a drunken slur. The surprise made my heart stop. I turned to see a haggard man looking at the memorial garden. He stunk of vodka and smiled at me sadly. "It won't stop her. It never does." He was right. Nicole still calls me, on any phone, at any time. No amount of call-blocking efforts can stop her. Sometimes I accidentally answer. She still screams for help, facing a danger that has long since passed. I was pulled aside at the start of my first shift back at work to talk about the calls with an officer who had come up from London. I assumed she was from the Home Office. She was very official and very guarded. I told her I had got calls on my personal phone, and she didn't seem surprised. She told me it was officially a hoax caller, but we both knew that wasn't true. I was instructed to keep a log of the calls and email them to her weekly. I have been off work for 2 weeks now. The woman who visited told me to take as much time off as I needed, on full pay. Her department would authorize it as long as I kept them updated. After all, I wouldn't be much use going to work just to talk to a woman who doesn't know she is dead. Story. My therapist said this would help. What happened at summer camp, 1977. I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm sitting at my computer, midnight, my fingers pecking out these terrible words on the keyboard. But insomnia is a bitch, and my therapist says this is a very healthy exercise. All I want is to get some sleep. He says that the words need to come out. They're clogging up my insides like sludge in ancient plumbing beneath a crumbling house. Words can be poison, he says. Thoughts can be poison. It's like draining a wound, he says. But don't you have to drain a wound over and over until it's healed? I don't think I can do this more than once. When I was 8, I went to summer camp. On the first night, 3 girls were raped, murdered, and left for the counselors to find the next morning. I've heard it all, the different diagnoses given by every doctor from one coast to the other. Survivor's guilt, PTSD, schizophrenia in some rare cases. The problem isn't in what I saw, it's in what I didn't say. Shit, I'm jumping around too much. Let me start over. 3 girls, raped and murdered while the camp counselors slept just yards away. Piled like dirty laundry on the trail with the silly name, because whoever left them there knew someone would be along sooner or later to take a shower. 3 little girls in their sleeping bags, excited for the start of summer camp. Just as excited as I was, hell, I may as well have been one of those little girls in tent number 7. They call it tent number 8, but that's stupid because we all know no one counted the counselor's tent. I was in tent number 6 with 3 other girls, or tent number 7, if you read the reports. Whatever. Does the number matter? Maybe it did. Oh God, I get this cold metal taste at the back of my throat when I think about how much it really might have mattered. We were all in the same group, the Kiowa group, our tents in a tight little cluster. It made it easy for him, I guess. Tiny little tents with tiny little girls inside. I'm off track again. I can't think. My hands are shaking, and I have to keep hitting the delete key. Start over. June, 1977. Tent number 6. That's where I was, until I heard the noise outside. I woke with a start, clutching the stuffed animal I had tried so hard to hide from the older girls because they had laughed and said toys were for babies. Mr. Beans wasn't for babies. He was a friend. But I didn't have many friends that weren't stuffed animals, so I kept him hidden in case the older girls came back. And maybe they had, was what I thought. The rustling sounds outside the tent sounded like someone was there, and my first thought was the older girls from the Arapaho group. Girls who were allowed to wear lip gloss and talked about boys, and just seemed so cool, like the ladies on the covers of magazines. They had teased me earlier at dinner that night, especially about Mr. Beans, but for one terrible hopeful moment I thought maybe they were testing me to see if I was tough enough to be their friend, to prove I wasn't a baby. Mama said sometimes that people teased because they liked you. I wanted them to like me. I didn't wake up the other girls, because I knew they would ruin the whole thing. They would probably cry and be babies, and then the older girls from Arapaho wouldn't be my friends. I even put Mr. Beans behind my suitcase so they wouldn't see him. I waited, but nothing happened. More rustles, that was all. The tent flap opened. I looked for the faces of my new friends, but it was a man. Not any of the counselors, someone I'd never seen before. This realization set in like a heavy stone sinking to the bottom of a black pond. I can't do this. I can't do this. I have to finish. I have to drain the wound. His eyes scanned the tent. His eyes counted 1, 2, 3, 4 little girls. His eyes stopped on me, the 4th little girl, and his eyes met mine. He smiled. It was not a very nice smile. He put one finger up to his lips, pursed them, and said, "Shh." I nodded, because he was a grown-up, and Mama taught me to listen to grown-ups. He ducked out and closed the tent flap again. It was late at night, or early in the morning. I'm not sure which, but it was so dark, and it seemed like such a long time to lay there awake, before I heard someone moaning in the distance. It was quiet, but not that far away. I'm told that other girls heard it too, but from 4 different areas of the camp at once. Some girls made up stories afterwards to get attention, but not me. I never told anyone, not until now. When the light finally started to break, I realized how badly I needed to pee. I wasn't sure if the man was still outside, but it was probably okay because it was morning and the sun was coming up over the horizon and bad things didn't happen to little girls in the sunshine. So I poked my head out of the tent, looked around. The sky was that pale white-blue color it turns just at dawn, but it still felt safe. Somehow better because the sun had risen and everything was okay. I headed down the trail with the funny name, towards the showers and the toilets, and that's where I saw them. At the base of a tree, slumped together like strange piles of garbage, were 3 little girls. I knew their names. I still know their names, but that doesn't matter now, does it? 2 of them were in their sleeping bags. One was just on the ground. She had her pajama top pushed up. No pajama bottoms. A strange red flashlight near their feet. There was blood. They weren't moving. I can see them. I can still see them. I can still see them. This doesn't feel like draining the wound so much as infecting it. I don't know why, but I went right past them. I guess I knew if I went back to my tent I'd wet the bed, and I'd never have any big girl friends, so I went right past the little sleeping bags and straight to the bathroom. I peed. I went back to tent number 6. Tent number 7 was empty. When I went back to sleep, the last sleep I ever had unbroken by nightmares or screaming, I think I had convinced myself the whole thing was a bad dream. There was no man, no pile of sleeping bags with dead little girls in them, no empty tent number 7. The counselors got us up earlier than usual. We went to the Great Hall for breakfast. We went canoeing in the river. It was fun. Everything was okay. Bad dream. That was all. Buses came to take us back to the Great Hall. When we got off the buses, one of the older counselors, the ones that ran the camp, he told us there was a problem with the water supply. Camp was canceled for the summer. We all needed to pack our things and go home. Water supply. Camp canceled. In tent number 6, the other girls whined about how it was unfair. They'd sold so many cookies to get here this year, and after one stupid day it was already over. But I kept hearing the gray-faced counselor's words in my ears. Camp is canceled. Camp is canceled. I tried to nap on the bus ride home, but my seatmate kept waking me up because I was crying in my sleep. She called me a baby. Bus stopped. Got off the bus. Troop leader said not to talk to anyone who wasn't our parents. Lots of reporters, shouting. Mama grabbed me and cried. No more camp, she said. She threw out my sleeping bag as soon as we got home. The police came once or twice after that, but I never talked to them. Mama told them I'd been very clear. I hadn't seen anything. I'd slept all night. I'd slept all night. I haven't slept a full night since. Would it have helped if I said something? If I had told? Every time I thought about doing it, my heart plummeted into my stomach. I saw the man's face and his finger on his lips and heard his shh. Usually I threw up. So these words, the words I've never said until now, they festered inside me like some exotic form of mental rot. I can't hold a job for more than a few months. I call in sick too much. No husband to speak of. The night terrors took care of that. A man will only sleep in your bed so many times before the screaming and thrashing drives him away. But my new therapist, he's been so nice. He tells me whatever happened isn't my fault, and that this will help. And I started to think that maybe it was time to tell. Time to describe the face that poked into tent number 6 that night in 1977. And then I remember why I can't. What I had blocked out. The thing my mind forced me to forget, even though I can still see the twisted, tangled little bodies underneath the tree as clear as day. My brain shattered this memory and scattered it to the wind. But it has always been there, waiting at the bottom of my gullet to force out vomit instead of words should I ever decide to tell. Mr. Beans was gone. When I went to pack my bag, Mr. Beans was gone, and in his place, a little scrap of paper, much like the one the counselors had found back in April and discarded as a joke. The note that mentioned killing 3 girls. 3 girls, not 4. Tent number 7, not 6. But my note, oh yes, my note. All it said was shh, we don't sleep. Story. There's a dark truth connecting 3 1980s upstate New York murder cases. This comes from someone who claims to be a former forensic investigator that worked for a few precincts in upstate New York. To clarify, I have no personal ties to this person, don't know why they specifically reached out to me, or felt this page was their only remaining option to tell their story. I'm simply passing along what they said and will leave it to your own interpretation. After conducting my own research, however, I will say their theories are plausible, and whoever this is genuinely believes they've uncovered something heinous. Here's the account I received, told in their point of view. I worked as a forensic investigator in New York State's Delaware and Columbia counties. I've seen my fair share of crime scenes, from child suicides at ages they had no business of even entertaining such thoughts, to gruesome accidents and murder victims killed in the worst ways imaginable. There were 3 particular cases whose backstories compelled me to dig deeper, even after the official investigations concluded. What I found made me question the extents of reality, human depravity, and avarice. The first happened in East Chatham, December 1986. A teen, who I'll refer to as Will, murdered 4 of his family members, seeming to be driven by financial gain. All 4 bodies were discovered in their bedrooms, dying from gunshot wounds to the head. Despite being described as a shallow, detached individual, Will excelled in school and was thought to have a bright future. His family was very active in the community and owned a successful business, which made these murders especially stunning. The teen readily confessed when questioned, but wasn't very forthcoming on certain crime scene details: dozens of candles placed on top of coins scattered around the house, inscriptions written in blood on the living room floor, most of which we couldn't document because they were repeatedly tracked over before we arrived, and the bodies all being smeared with an oily light green substance. The coroner reports on all 4 bodies described their wounds as narrow, bullet-shaped holes entering through the victim's forehead, and exiting through the back. The exit wounds looked nothing like those made by bullets. No casings or rounds were found, and tests for gunpowder residue were incidentally damaged at the lab by a pipe burst. While the official report said all 4 victims died from gunshots, it was technically never proven. Thinking they had sufficient evidence, detectives saw no need to investigate further after Will confessed and overlooked these bizarre details. Although they determined Will, who claimed to have no recollection of that night, suffered a psychotic breakdown, I always suspected he had an ulterior motive. Any attempts at deciphering what was written on the living room floor were futile, except for one semi-legible phrase, Judoc. The light green slippery substance slathered on all 4 bodies was also identified as money oil, an herbal remedy used in witchcraft that supposedly brings prosperous wealth. Although many acknowledged there was a lot more going on, everyone ultimately wanted to move forward and minimize the attention East Chatham was receiving from this tragedy. In the end, I understood the desire to put this dark chapter of East Chatham's history behind us, and eventually accepted I wouldn't learn any more about what happened than what was already known. Fast forward a few years later, when I was working in Delaware County. The second case happened in June 1989, another mass murder that conjured up memories of East Chatham. A 23-year-old, I'll call Evan, murdered his family at their cabin outside Stamford. Lit candles placed on top of coins littered the home, where 4 bodies were found in the house's attic. Initially perceived as gunshots, the autopsy report explained their wounds as being bullet-shaped entrances that went completely through the victim's body. Unlike the East Chatham killings, these murder victims contained several deep perforations. The bodies were centered around a strange symbol that seemed to depict a blocky, crookedly drawn uppercase B. A small backwards J protruded from the B's lower left corner, while a jagged uppercase T branched off its top left end. The emblem was drawn with a scorched powder that, based on samples recovered, had an initial light green color and was composed of different herbs. It looked like Evan had been interrupted in the middle of whatever he was doing, prompting him to flee. He was cornered at an abandoned farm in a neighboring county, which ensued a lengthy standoff. Before being gunned down after opening fire on police, officers on scene recalled Evan kept screaming he was so close, needed to complete the circle, and finish the process. One bizarre piece of evidence was a black envelope Evan pinned on his family's business storefront sometime after committing the murders. It was covered in green wax and contained burnt remnants of paper that, from what few strands were salvaged, appeared to be some kind of letter or note. Although Evan apparently had severe mental issues, this dismissive explanation for his appalling actions disregarded some alarming details. Evan was apparently obsessed with money and wealth, to the point where it influenced him at a cognitive level. He stood to assume his entire family's estate, which, according to friends of his, Evan incessantly pondered about the liquid value of and what he'd do with all that cash. When I disputed the investigation's conclusions, my police chief gave a familiar explanation. "Evan's dead," he said. "No need to allocate time and resources to an already solved case." Even after noting every similarity with the East Chatham murders, he wouldn't entertain any further inquiries, and eventually reassigned me to another division. It was after this I learned the powdery substance found in the attic was identified as money powder, which had many similar vegetal ingredients as its oleaginous counterpart, money oil. Despite violating orders and an abundance of department codes, I started my own secret investigation trying to connect these cases. There was too much overlap between them that I couldn't let this go without leaving no stone unturned. Both killings were committed by young men with financial motives. They murdered their families in near-identical manners. Candles placed on top of coins and substances made from the same materials were found at both crime scenes. Although I was convinced Will and Evan were trying to perform the same or closely related rituals, my evidence was circumstantial at best. I needed a direct link connecting them that would give my theory the credence necessary to be taken seriously. About a year into my independent probe, a case from February 1988 in Groveland, New York, was brought to my attention. A man I'll call Larry murdered his whole family before committing suicide and setting their house on fire. After extinguishing the blaze, police discovered 5 bodies. Larry killed his wife and 3 children, who were each found lying in their beds. Although gunshots were officially deemed all 5 victims' causes of death, Larry was the only one described as being explicitly caused by a firearm. His wife and kids died from what the documents described as wounds closely resembling a gunshot that completely passed through the victim's cranial region. For me, there were 2 affirming details in this case that connected to the East Chatham and Stamford killings. Investigators determined the fire was started by lighting a charred black envelope. The note inside was too badly burned and no longer legible, but this envelope looked exactly like the one Evan pinned on his family's storefront. Larry also had a tattoo on his back matching the symbol found at the Stamford Sinea jagged B with a smaller uppercase T and backwards J stemming from its corners. I also discovered Larry and his wife were having marital problems, which derived from a crippling financial situation that put them on the precipice of ruin. Finding this case led to more chilling discoveries. One regarded an owl rope bracelet with a gold wolf head charm Larry had on his wrist. Will wore the exact same bracelet when he was found, which I neglected to mention earlier. Despite living in Groveland when murdering his family, Larry settled there fairly recently, having lived most of his life in Shohair County. Not only did he own a business in East Chatham from 1983-1985, where Will happened to work for 8 months, but the abandoned farmhouse where Evan made his final stand was on land formerly owned by Larry's family. I delved further into Larry's background. Although information was hard to come by, it led me to learning about Lupus Vertus, meaning green wolf in Latin. What little I found described them as some kind of fraternal order, where Larry was a member. The only other details I uncovered about Lupus Vertus was they were formerly headquartered in a now abandoned lodge located somewhere between Medusa and Southwesterlorley, the midway point between East Chatham and Stamford. The lodge burned down in the summer of 1989, after which the organization appeared to cease operations. The former lodge's dilapidated remains still stand today. I spent months trying to uncover more about Lupus Vertus, but had stagnant progress and came to a barrage of dead ends. Shortly after, however, my rogue investigation was halted after being discovered by the DA's office. Although no charges were pressed, the police confiscated most of my documents and case files, after which I was swiftly terminated. A few years passed, when something seemingly out of the blue happened that dragged me back down this rabbit hole. I woke up one morning to find hundreds of papers, which came from a filing cabinet filled with old files I still had on these cases that the police somehow missed, littering the room where they were kept. Written on every one of those papers was a 6-letter word: Mammon. It was written in what appeared to be blood-end. I initially neglected to mention the filing cabinet holding these old documents was in my bedroom. I couldn't let anyone know these files were still in my possession, so I took to the internet, where I gained a lot of perturbing insight on this word's meaning. Mammon was a theological demonic entity, representing greed and want, who promised its worshippers boundless wealth. I almost fell over after first seeing Mammon's sigil, a distorted B with an uppercase T and backwards J jutting from its upper and lower left corners. It was the same symbol found in Will's attic and tattooed on Larry's back. This led me to read up on the different rituals for summoning Mammon. They varied in complexity, and many involved using specific items like candles, coins, owl rope, herbal remedies like money, oil, and powder, along with writing letters and requests to Mammon that you burn or place in black envelopes. I was especially bothered by a redundant detail of Mammon's appearance that was in quite a few visual depictions of the being. Many had Mammon brandishing a long, narrow spike that retracted from its wrist, which was used to impale its victims' bodies. The stories I read said Mammon extract people's souls in this grisly manner, which were added to a collection it amassed over the millennia. It made me think about the wounds every one of those cases' murder victims had, which every report was quick to write off as gunshots. What else could create that type of opening? Were those poor souls truly at rest, or suffering a far worse fate? Mammon also apparently frequented the form of a wolf, which made sense of the fraternal order being named Lupus Vertus, and those owl rope bracelets worn by Will and Larry having wolf head charms. I also don't think the dates all 3 massacres occurred were randomly chosen. Will killed his family on the 13th of December, when the Feast of St. Judoc is held. Judok, the word we found written at the East Chatham crime scene, was a young, wealthy prince who gave up his opulence to become a priest. He lived a life of modesty, solitude, and was said to be a staunch adversary of Mammon, since he stood against everything the demon represented. Apparently, using blood to write names of you or your deity's antagonists is a form of mockery and scorn in occultism that supposedly appeases and empowers your idol. The Stamford murders happened on the 22nd of June, which falls on the summer solstice, whose signified period of growth is considered an opportune time to summon certain beings, and when the season of Mammon begins. Larry's murder-suicide occurred on the 28th of February, 1988, which fell on a leap year. In the dark arts, leap years are supposed to provide a window for spirits and other beings to enter our world. It's worth mentioning many works I read about or mentioned Mammon described him coming in and out of our world using these leap year portals. Having presented my facts, I'll now tell you what I believe happened. Lupus Vertus was secretly a cult dedicated to Mammon, whose members sought wealth and prosperity. Some rituals for summoning this being say flesh and blood offerings yielded greater rewards, based on enormity, if done correctly and precisely. I suppose the magnitude of sacrificing one's family was thought to yield endless rewards from this being. Larry recruited Will and Evan, who became indoctrinated by the Order's teachings. My guess is Will failed to properly complete his ritual, causing him to undergo an irreversible mental breakdown. Evan appeared to have gotten interrupted while performing his, likely by police when they arrived at the house. Larry's situation was less clear. He was overcome with grief, either for botching or coming to grips on what he was actually doing during his ritual, and ended his life in response. After how much publicity the Stamford killings got, Lupus Vertus probably decided to vacate the area or go underground, which could explain why their lodge burned. I expectedly made waves when trying to get my findings reviewed and investigate whether Lupus Vertus was still operating. I should have seen it coming, but anyone who even gave me the time of day dismissed my report, saying the evidence was too disputable, circumstantial, and, most insulting of all, inventive. I eventually gave up when my former precincts threatened me with legal action for not turning over all the files and documents I still had, who said I was rehashing settled business that had no need to be revisited. Things settled down for a while afterwards, until something that happened recently. I found a familiar-looking black envelope among some of my spouse's belongings, while clearing out a room that we were renovating. After reading the recently dated letter it contained, I now know I'm not safe in my home, and have been closely watched by people I've known and loved for years on behalf of a certain aforementioned organization. I don't know who to trust or where I'll go, but hope making my story known will help anyone that is, or suspects they're in a similar situation. This goes way deeper than expected, and those cases I used to put this puzzle together may only be the beginning of uncovering what other horrors this entity and its devout followers have committed.